Here's the Canon XF400, and here is the Panasonic CX10. It is very similar to the Panasonic X1500 and 2000. The differences are some internal codecs are different in the CX10, and with the X1500, you don't get the handle, but you can buy the handle separately, and the X1500 does not have HDSDI out, but the CX10 and the X2000 does. They both have HDSDI out. The difference between the X2000 and the CX10 is that the CX10 has an additional streaming mode to live stream, and then it also has some internal codecs that are legacy codecs using the P2 architecture. Other than that, the CX10 is near identical in quality to the X2000 and the X1500. When it comes to the XF400, in a future video, I'm going to do a comparison with the XA50. And the XA50 and the XF400, the differences are mostly the size and the fact that the XF400 can shoot at UHD 60p, and the XA50 is limited to 30p at UHD. Otherwise, those two cameras are very similar. So when it comes to price range, currently the XF400 is going for around $2,500 US, and the CX10 is going for around $2,600 US. The X2000 is $2,200. The X2000 is more comparable to the XF400 than the CX10, but I happen to have the CX10. So in this video, I'm going to be comparing the two, saying what I like and don't like about each camera. And at the end, I will show some test footage, but my opinion, just to fast forward my final thoughts, I'll give that first, is that I am leaning more towards the CX10 X2000 Panasonic for documentary event video in daytime, and sometimes some low light. But I am very impressed by the Panasonic. I've used the XF400 for a few years now, so maybe it's the fact that the Panasonic is newer and it has a little bit more advanced features, but I'm leaning towards the Panasonic over the XF400 as the best prosumer type small camcorder. Since I'm already a fan of the Panasonic right now, I'm just going to list the 5 points where I think the XF400 is superior to the Panasonic. So the first point is, if you already have other Canon cameras, whether that's a mirrorless camera or additional camcorders, and they're all Canon and you do multicam, you're going to want to just stick with Canon, because it's very tricky for even semi-professionals to try to match cameras together. So if I do often do multicam, and I have Canon DSLRs, mirrorless cameras. So if I were to use those Canon mirrorless cameras in a multicam shoot, I'm going to use the XF400 and not the Panasonic, because it'll just be easier for me to match the colors. So that's the number one. So if you already are in the Canon ecosystem, stick with Canon. It's not that much of a value to go to the Panasonic. Number two, the Canon has a 1-inch sensor, and the Panasonic has a 1/2.5-inch sensor, which is way small. It's as small as those older HD camcorders. The 1-inch sensor size has become the new standard of these prosumer cameras, and anything smaller than that, you're going backwards in technology. So what does the 1-inch sensor do? The 1-inch sensor is better in low light, and it gives you better depth of field. So it makes things more in focus in the foreground and out of focus in the background. You can get that effect in the Panasonic, but it's not as easy. So when it comes to low light, not by that much. When you're going to see in my low light tests, it's better, but not a huge amount compared to a mirrorless camera, or full frame, or APS-C size, that's a different ball game. But when you're 1 inch and 1/2.5 in low light with this form factor, it is better. The Canon is better, but not by much. As far as the overall look goes, I think people nowadays prefer the shallower depth of field rather than everything in focus. For my uses of this kind of camera, I would prefer things to all be in focus. Getting a little distracted for making the CX10 better than the XF400, but XF400, superior sensor size. The third thing about the XF400 is that the body itself, even though it's much bigger than the CX10 and there are advantages to being smaller, this feels like a more robust, stronger body. Yeah, I feel like this can go at the beach, in the desert, in the mountains, in the snow, and it will be more resilient to the weather conditions than the CX10. I haven't tested this. It just feels like in my hand, the XF400 is a better build quality. So if that means anything to you, then it's an advantage for me anyways for the XF400. Number 4, the Canon recently had a firmware update, and you can now shoot Canon C-Log3 on the Canon. You cannot do any log on the CX10 currently. I'm hoping they release a firmware update where you can have a V-Log-L, but right now you can't. But on the Canon, you have C-Log3. It's 8-bit and not 10-bit, but you get log. That gives you more dynamic range when you properly expose. And the fifth thing that I think is superior, the Canon XF400 has 4 channels of audio. You have 2 XLRs, and then you also have a 3.5mm jack or the stereo mics here. So you can have 4 channels of audio, and there's different configurations you could wrap the audio in to give you redundancy if audio is very important to you, which to me it's very important whenever I'm shooting interviews, live events. The CX10, X2000, X1500, you only get 2 channels of audio, XLR or the internal, and there's also a 3.5mm jack right there. Now that I've listed my 5 things I love about the XF400 over the CX10, I'm going to just talk about the CX10 and do some references to the XF400 for comparisons. Some of the bad things about this camera, just to get it out of the way, is with the handling, it doesn't feel as strong as the XF400. It does have a more plastic feel, a cheaper feel, and I don't want to drop this. I don't want to drop any camera, but this one feels more like a toy, and the hand grip isn't that comfortable. It's very smooth right where your fingers go, where the palm and fingers go, and it actually extends. It's a weird shape. It's shaped like this, like a pyramid shape. So your hand doesn't quite fit very well. Yeah, I have to really tighten the strap here, this hand strap, in order to lock it in when I'm doing handheld shots. So it's not as good to hold as you would think with the size. So that's the size problem that I have. I wish this were a little more fun to hold. But the biggest issue with the CX10 is the sensor size. 1/2.5. Everyone's complaining about it. I complain about it. And it is a problem. It's not that great in low light when you compare it to full frame, APS-C, Micro Four Thirds. It just doesn't do well in low light. So the solution that I heard some of the reps of Panasonic say online is that, oh, well, if you're going to be shooting low light, use a GH5. You use a bigger camera with a bigger sensor. And I'm like, yeah, obviously we could do that, but if you can't afford a secondary camera, and this is your only camera, you're kind of out of luck. So what you could do to supplement is the Panasonic here gives you a light on the handle. So you turn on the light. Oh, I need to turn on the camera in order to enable the light. So I'm going to turn on the camera. and I'll just extend the viewfinder here. I don't have the eye cup. I took out the eye cup. But I'm going to turn on the camera, and then I'm going to turn on the light. And this light is more useful than I thought it was going to be. I remember back in the day when I was shooting event videos and I was going into clubs, concerts. I haven't done that many weddings, but if I did a wedding, I would have a LED light on the camera, you know, to put light on people that I'm interviewing. And that's a really clever idea that they just put a light up here, and it's pretty good. It's good color, temperature. I believe it's a daylight balance, and you can't switch the temperature, but you can increase the gain, and it's pretty bright. Here's a little light dial here. It doesn't look that bright right now because I'm shooting in daylight, but at night it really illuminates whatever's in front of the lens here. So they give you that as kind of a way to make up for how bad it is in low light. But you know, when I did these tests, this is a 1.8, f1.8 to f4. The XF400 is a 2.8 to around 382 millimeters. So it's a 20 times optical, 15 times optical. 20 times optical, it's wider and it goes further because of the smaller sensor size. And at f1.8, I was really curious about this. When you have a smaller sensor but a wider aperture lens versus a larger sensor but an aperture that isn't as wide, you're getting more closer to equal as far as light gathering capabilities go. And the XF400 with the 1-inch sensor is still better at 2.8, but not by a huge margin when you're shooting at 1.8 all the way zoomed out. The minute you start zooming in though, that's when these cameras, they both become kind of bad in low light, because yeah, you have f.28, but the minute you start zooming in, you're down to 3.2, then immediately, you know, f4.5 at the all the way at the zoomed in length. And here, the minute you start zooming in, you lose the 1.8 and it goes down to 2, 2.5, and then sooner or later, you're quickly at f4. So low light, yeah, low light is a problem. It's not as big of a problem as you think, but it is a problem. And if you shoot a lot of low light, the CX10's probably not going to be your camera. However, if you're outdoors, that's where this really excels. And I can't tell the difference between this quality and bigger cameras, bigger sensored cameras, because this punches well above its weight in its codecs. This has so many codecs, which is what I would get this camera for the most. This is the only camcorder I know about that can shoot 422 10-bit at UHD 30p. It does shoot UHD 60p, but only at 420 10-bit. But 422 10-bit, highest quality. I believe it's 200 megabits. Let me just go into the menu here. The way you turn it on is you push this button. I wish it would have had a switch that would make it faster, but you just push that button. Just open that up here. And then let's go to the menu system. Menu. I'm not liking this menu system, but it's functional. And we go to system. We go to, oh, you can shoot, it's NTSC and PAL. The formats, you have different formats here. I'm gonna stick with MOV. The P2 is only with the CX10. The other X2000 and 1500 do not have the P2. But let me back up here and go into the record formats, and you can just see here all of these different formats that you can choose from. All I mode, long GOP. You can have so many different flavors and dial them in. When it comes to picture profiles, let me go to the picture profiles here. I believe it's scene file. And there we go. So picture profiles, you got your Cine D and Cine V. I always shoot Cine D up until I believe the GH4 or GH3 or GH4. I was always shooting Cine D because it didn't have the V-Log. Now that it has the V-Log, I'll often go to the V-Log, but the Cine D is a very helpful mode. I want this camera to have V-Log. If this has V-Log with 422 10-bit, that Panasonic better do that. It would add so much more value to this camera if it could shoot V-Log. But right now, no V-Log, but so Cine D would have to do for now. But there you go. You have the other standard picture profiles that are in a lot of other Panasonic cameras, and then you can also dial in those picture profiles here. So you have a lot of the gamma, the knee, the matrix, all of that stuff that you can do in previous prosumer Panasonic cameras, you can do in this camera. You cannot do that with this many controls in the XF400. XF400, you're locked in at several preset picture profiles, and you can change a little bit of it. I think the sharpness and the color saturation, there's like four options to control the picture profile, but there's not that much. Here, you have a lot more control in a traditional way of Panasonic's old line of camcorders. You could always do these kinds of changes and get the look that you want. And it's really important with camcorders anyways to get the look you want in camera. It's harder to make all the changes in post like you can with mirrorless cameras that shoot log. The lens here is a 62mm, which I thought was interesting because it's a bigger diameter than the XF400. XF400 is a 58mm, and this is a 62. The angle of view, so it's 25.5 versus 25. Not that big of a deal on the wide angle, but it's wider. And one advantage is that I had owned, this is the Canon wide angle adapter, 0.8 times. That was meant for the XF200 and XA20, the previous models to the XF400. With the XF400 and XF405 and 705, you had to buy a brand new wide angle adapter. This one won't even fit on that camera. However, this does fit on the Panasonic. I needed a step-up ring, so I have this step-up ring. So it's a 58 stepping up to a 62, right? So I put this on, and then I could screw it on to my Panasonic here, and now the 25mm changes to, what's 0.8 times 25? 20mm? Is that 20mm? So now I have a 20mm wide angle with the Canon wide angle adapter from an old model. The problem is, it's a good thing and a bad thing. The image stabilization, the 5-axis image stabilization in this CX10 is phenomenal. It's really good. It's better than the XF400. XF400 has I think a 5-axis image stabilization. Panasonic is way better. However, the sensor kind of moves around to when you're on the advanced stabilization modes, and it causes vignetting. There's vignetting on the camera, so you have to zoom in a little bit. So it's more like a 21 or 22 millimeters once you compensate for the vignetting. And yeah, so you have this wide angle adapter. So, if you're in the market, if you want a wide angle field of view, a wider angle field of view on the CX10 here, then you don't have to pay as much, because these ones are cheaper now. The old Canon one, if you can find them on eBay or something, they discontinued this one, but you could probably get this for $300, maybe $250, and the other ones are upwards of like $400, $500. When you are in low light and you're out in the woods, or you're just out in complete darkness, this has an infrared mode, and you can switch it from green or black and white. Let me take off this handle here. I really like this handle compared to the XF400. So you just move one knob here and you eject it. Oh. There you go. So you can remove it. It has electronic components here. And it's interesting how it goes in. It just goes in there. But when that's not connected, you have this space here to connect another piece of gear. So there's no electronic components. This is a regular cold shoe. And then you have an extra, I believe that's a 3/8. That's probably a 3/8 or 1/4-20. It's one of them. But you have a 1/4-20 up here. You do not have a 1/4-20 on the Canon. So you can screw in another accessory. There is a XLR mount that I just removed, and there's an XLR mount there that I removed. This comes with some caps to cover it up. I feel like this is a very well-built XLR module here, and then you have your controls, XLR controls right there. You don't need this, of course. This can operate without it. Very slim profile. When it comes to more manual controls, I would say these are kind of neck and neck with manual controls. Even though this has 2 rings and this only has 1 ring, this all-purpose custom wheel here can act as whatever you want, like an iris, and you can adjust this as well as focus and zoom right here. It's really simple to operate, very intuitive. This is much the same way, but you have 2 rings, zoom and focus. You have your ND filters, and then this, you have another wheel. This wheel isn't as functional or as easy to use as the other one on the XF400, but you can use it, and it's also a button that you can push in, and you can scroll through the menu system. This is how I like to go through the menu system. With the Panasonic 15, 2000, and CX10, you have a massive battery. This is the battery that goes onto their bigger prosumer bodies. Let me eject it here. Check that out and compare this battery to what the Canon is using. This battery on the Canon, when it's brand new, I think I got at most maybe a little over 100 minutes, maybe 2 hours on when I didn't have the LCD on, and I was turning on all of the power consuming, no XLR, no LCD. I could maybe get 2 hours off of this battery. It's more closer to 90 minutes or less. 90 minutes or less of continuous shooting on this one battery. But this Panasonic battery, which also has a battery checker on it, this battery can go over 4.5 hours. You can shoot over 4.5 hours of the highest quality with this battery. I haven't timed it with the light on, in addition to the XLR and everything on, but I bet it's not going to take that much of the battery life away. And this is such a robust battery. You can find a bunch of these, and the third parties work, as far as I have tested. Goes here on the bottom. I thought this was a strange design, but this is a great design. Last all day, 4.5 hours. 2 of these, that's all you need. It doesn't come with a separate battery charger. It comes with an AC wall charger here, which is also pretty small, and that's how you charge the battery. Or you can just go online, and then I went on Amazon and I bought this extra battery and this extra Castar charger. It seems to work fine. The charger was $14 or $15, and the extra battery was, I think, another $15, $20. So for under $50, you can get a whole other battery charging setup. And the last thing I'll talk about with the Panasonic that sets it apart from the XF400 is that this line of camcorder has been heavily advertised for its live streaming capabilities. I have not utilized that. I don't need that as much. But if you're a live streamer, or you work at, you're doing videography for a church or anything that has a live stream, and a camcorder is more suitable form factor than having a DSLR, because with DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, you're always dependent on the type of lens that you get. And those can be quite expensive, especially if you want a servo zoom lens. Those get really expensive. So here is a better way to, more traditional way of having it on a zoom that also has, I believe there's a remote. Where's the remote here? Yeah, you can have you can buy a cheap remote to control the zooms here. And let me see what else is back here. Oh, back here is you have a full-size HDMI. That's the other thing. Full-size HDMI on the CX10, X2000, 1500. This one, you have I think it's a mini. Is it a mini? Yeah, you have a HDMI mini, which kind of sucks. So you have HDMI mini. Here you have a full HDMI and an HD SDI. I was reading that you can't do both at the same time. I have to verify that though. And here is your headphone jack and your DCI in for your wall power. Here's the record button, battery ejector, a zoom rocker. You have custom buttons. These custom buttons, you can trigger anything you want on you can customize it. So they waveforms, zebras, focus peaking, all that stuff. Here's your gain, iris, shutter buttons that you push these and then you could dial in your shutter and your iris and gain and all that stuff. 2 SD cards on this side. Yeah, not much else. I wish there was another record button right here. But, you know, when you put on the handle, you have a record button there. Let's see, is there anything else to talk about? The LCD screen is surprisingly really good. I don't use the EVF because the LCD screen it's 3.5. The XF400 is also a 3.5 screen. Put it side by side here. But the screen on the Panasonic has more pixels, has more pixel dots in it. So you can go outside in bright sunlight and still see on the Panasonic versus the Canon. And I find that this to be more accurate of an LCD screen than the LCD screen on the Canon. So the Canon, while it's still good, and this LCD screen is better than the XA50, this is not as sharp and clear and bright as the Panasonic. The Panasonic, they hit a winner with this LCD. In previous Panasonic camcorders that I've owned, the LCD always sucked. This one, the best. This is the best LCD that I've seen Panasonic make in a camcorder. All right, so those are all the features that I wanted to talk about with the CX10 in comparison to the XF400. Now I'm going to show some test footage where I'm battling these cameras neck to neck.